addition to climate, which I'll get to, air pollution is the second leading cause of death worldwide. Almost 7.5 million people die of air pollution every year. So just to put in perspective, air pollution is actually a greater cost to society right now. And these are all avoidable deaths. And so we just have to start burning things. Burning is the problem. Electrification is the solution, providing the electricity from clean renewable energy. And also reducing energy use, energy efficiency, more efficient appliances and machines. So comparing all those technologies, it turned out when you looked at the overall impacts on air pollution, climate, and energy security, what we call wind, water, solar technologies beat the other ones out. We're better than nuclear, better than coal with carbon capture, better than biofuels.
Let's say you're a politician, an oil executive, or someone who just really loves fossil fuels. You've probably spent the last 20 years saying, we can't transition to clean energy yet. It's too complicated. Well, bad news. Mark Jacobson exists. This guy isn't just a Stanford professor. He's a full-blown climate killjoy for people clinging to coal. He builds mathematical models that prove over and over again that we can power the entire planet with wind, water, and the sun. No fairy dust, no wishful thinking, just data so clear it makes lobbyists sweat. And if that sounds ambitious, it gets better. Jacobson doesn't just think 100% renewables are possible. He thinks they are inevitable. No nukes, no carbon capture, no unicorn farting green hydrogen. Just technologies we already have, scaled and deployed. Of course, not everyone's a fan. He's been praised by politicians, sued by scientists, and probably blocked by ExxonMobil on Twitter. But in a world addicted to delay, he's the annoying friend who says, actually, we can leave the party now. And it turns out he might be right. Mark, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show, Arnis.
Mark, what's the one uncomfortable truth about climate and energy that almost no one wants to hear, but we absolutely need to?
Well, in addition to climate, which I'll get to, air pollution is the second leading cause of death worldwide. Almost 7.5 million people die of air pollution every year. And all the same emissions that affect climate, all the same sources that affect climate are also sources of pollution that causes death to millions of people each year and hundreds of millions more illnesses. Climate change is a growing problem, and it will, we're already at about 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming since the 1850 to 1900 period. And if we keep emitting as we are today, we're going to blow past 2 degrees. And already air pollution costs the world, in terms of statistical cost of life, on the order of $30 trillion per year. Now, global warming is expected to cost that by around 2050. So just to put in perspective, air pollution is actually a greater cost to society right now. And these are all avoidable deaths. And climate change is avoidable as well. We just need to electrify everything and provide the electricity from clean renewable sources. It's pretty straightforward. It's a very straightforward solution. Emissions are the problem. Emissions of gases and particles from coal, oil, gas, also bioenergy sources as well. And so we just have to start burning things. Burning is the problem. Electrification is the solution, providing the electricity from clean renewable energy. And also reducing energy use, energy efficiency, more efficient appliances and machines. It's a straightforward solution. Only reason it's hard to solve is it's such a large problem. And from a social and political point of view, it's always difficult to get everybody to agree on something. But from a technical and economic point of view, it's a straightforward solution.
You've spent decades fighting for this 100% renewable energy vision. But where did this fight actually begin for you?
Well, I think actually, if I go back to around 1978, when I was 13 years old, I used to travel from Northern California, where I grew up, to Southern California, mostly San Diego and Los Angeles. And observed the air pollution was so bad there. It was very difficult to breathe, to see, scratchy eyes, scratchy face, um, choking smog, essentially. And I thought, why should people live like this? And so I
Yeah.
really, at that point, it was back then that I said I want to, when I grow up, to try to understand this problem and then solve it. And so my first step was, well, you can't really try to solve a problem unless you really understand it. So I spent, uh, my undergraduate period at university and also the graduate school trying to find a way, a niche to actually understand the problem. And I did it through computer modeling of air pollution, which I built an air pollution model for Los Angeles and when I was a PhD student. And then I expanded that to study global pollution and climate by expanding that air pollution model for a city to the globe. And then I did everything in between by what we call nesting the global model with the urban scale model. So you can look at all the scales in between. And I used that model, which was models are very powerful tools. I mean, they're much smarter than our own brains because they can do many more calculations that we can't do in our head. And I was able to use that model to understand the different chemical impacts on climate. For example, black carbon. One of the things I found was black carbon, which is the main component of soot that comes from diesel exhaust, jet fuel burning, kerosene burning, biomass burning. Maybe the second leading cause of global warming after carbon dioxide because of it's not a greenhouse gas that absorbs heat from the surface of the earth, although it does absorb heat. It creates its heat by taking sunlight and converting that sunlight into heat and radiating that heat to the air around it. And it also affects cloudiness. It burns off clouds. It melts snow when it deposits onto snow. When you account for all the impacts, it's the second leading cause of global warming, causing maybe 17 to 20% of all warming compared with carbon dioxide, which is about 45%. And so you couldn't do that without a complicated model. You couldn't account for those complex physical and chemical interactions to really look at the impacts of black carbon. But also then at one point I was looking at the problems and understanding the problems better. And then I wanted to understand the solution. So I used those models to then look at the impacts of different control strategies on air pollution and climate. So then I
Mm.
started comparing different technologies, like comparing wind versus coal, comparing ethanol versus gasoline, diesel versus gasoline, hydrogen fuel cells versus gasoline. So I did all these comparisons using the model to look at the impacts. And of course, as you would expect, wind's going to
Yeah.
beat coal in terms of air pollution and climate impacts. Hydrogen fuel cells, when they're powered by wind, are going to beat gasoline and even hybrid vehicles. And it turns out, kind of more, it wasn't really clear at the time what would happen, but when you compare gasoline and ethanol, it turns out ethanol was worse than gasoline, whereas people were pushing ethanol in the early 2000s as a savior from gasoline.
Yeah.
Turned out it actually makes the problem worse in many cases, most cases actually in the United States and also worldwide. And that's an example of where we can't just use our intuition and
Mm.
limited amount of data from like just looking even at emission factors to actually determine what's going to happen. You actually have to calculate the chemistry of what's going on in the atmosphere and all the complex interactions. And so that was the epitome of why you need to understand the problem before you propose solutions, because it turns out ethanol is just a harebrained solution. It doesn't actually improve the problem, it makes it slightly worse. Although it turns out both of them are bad solutions. I mean, it doesn't mean gasoline's better than, much
Yeah.
better than
Yeah.
ethanol. It's both bad. You really need electric vehicles to get rid of all combustion. And this is also an example of why it's important to electrify everything, because electrification, you don't have to worry about what the emissions are. When you add particle traps to diesel, for example, you reduce one set of pollutants, you increase another set of pollutants. When you switch fuels, you increase one set of pollutants, you decrease another set of pollutants. And so it's really easy to claim you're doing something good when in fact you're not doing anything better, because you just have a different mix of chemicals, and there's a lot more there's complex interactions that the human brain can't figure out on their own.
Mm.
And so you need a model to figure out whether it's better or worse. And most models aren't even capable of doing that. Most models are very simple because you need not only humongous computer power, but a lot of details in models that 99% of models don't have. So, uh, so anyway, I used for a while that I was trying to understand the problem. And eventually, like in 2008, I started looking at, well, I mean, I was looking at wind energy before that, starting in the year 2000. But in around 2008, I was looking at, okay, what are the best technologies if we looked at, if we wanted to solve global warming, air pollution, and also energy security simultaneously, what
Mhm.
are the best technologies to do this? So I just compared a bunch of technologies in terms of a lot of their impacts on the environment and on energy stability as well. And from
So,
that comparison, yeah, from the comparison where I compared like wind, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric, tidal wave, coal with carbon capture, biofuels, nuclear hydropower, everything, so comparing all those technologies, it turned out when you looked at the overall impacts on uh, air pollution, climate, and energy security, what we call wind, water, solar technologies beat the other ones out. We're better than nuclear, better than coal with carbon capture, better than biofuels. And so that's where this wind, water, solar came out. It was this evaluation, the agnostic evaluation of these different technologies in terms of their impacts on the environment, climate, energy, climate, air
yeah.
pollution, energy security. And uh, and so then the next question was, well, if wind, water, solar technologies are the best, can we actually power the world? So Mark DeLucchi, who was at UC Davis at the time, and I did a paper in Scientific American in 2009 that looked at that question: can we power the whole world with just wind, water, and solar for all energy purposes? So electricity, transportation, buildings, industry, if we electrify everything. And the conclusion was, yes, it's technically and economically possible. There are social and political barriers which will delay a solution. But if we really wanted to do it, and this is back in 2009, if we really wanted to do it by 2030, we could. We had the materials, we had the resources, and we could we can do the conversions. I mean, we didn't have all the conversion technologies. We didn't have like long distance aircraft, long distance ships that were either, let's say, hydrogen fuel cell electric or battery electric.
Mhm.
Uh, but we were close. We had, at that time we probably had like 92% of the technologies. Now we have about 97% of the technologies we need, but we have all the energy we need. So, that was like a worldwide calculation. Could we power the whole world with wind, water, solar? We didn't look at individual countries or individual states in the US or territories elsewhere. Uh, we subsequently did do that, and we've now done 150 countries. We've done all 50 US states individually to see, can we power each country state? And yes, we can. But back in 2009, we came to that conclusion. It's technically and economically possible, but nobody believed it would actually happen. It was, we got criticized a lot saying this is pie in the sky. This will never happen. But
So
at the yeah,
you're
okay.
you're now touching the real problem, and amongst those is the speed with which we can do that actually. And but I'm also curious about what about the mining part? What about the rare minerals, and what about the speed of mining that we need to really transition, and how fast can we transition? And like,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, good question. And so, well, back in 2009, first of all, people were saying you can't keep the grid stable with when you have more than 20% renewables on the grid. That has evolved now. That was just an arbitrary number at the time.
Mhm.
By 2017, they were saying you can't keep the grid stable when there's more than 80% renewables on the grid. Now they're saying, well, you can do it at 100% renewables, but it'll just be higher cost. And so there's also, this is a moving target all the
Yeah.
time. It's just people have never done that. But the real question, how fast can you do it? Okay, it turns out you can do it really fast. And we can look at China and see how fast are they transitioning. If we look at their rate of installations in 2024, 2025 alone, um, based on their rate of installations in 2024 of just wind, solar, primarily solar, then wind, and some hydro. And they're also adding batteries and electric vehicles at a large pace. Based on the 2024 rate, they would be 100% renewable across all energy sectors, eliminating 100% of all their emissions from energy, which energy emissions account for about 90% of air pollution emissions and about 75 to 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. There would be 100% renewables by around 2048. Based on their 2025 installations so far, which are around, I think, 240 gigawatts of solar and wind in just the first 5 months of 2025, and you extrapolate that out to the end of the year, they will be 100% renewable across all energy sectors by 2043. That's just in 18 years, they will transition their entire economy, electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry. That's if they keep this pace up, the 2025 pace up by 2043. So, and they are responsible for about 33% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's the largest emitting country, largest energy consuming country can be at their current pace of transformation. Right now, they're at about 28% the way they need to be. Get the way 20% of the way, 28% of the way they where
Yeah.
they need to be 100% renewable. And they will be 100% renewable by 2043. So just think about that. The US, by the way, in comparison, is, I mean, is way behind. I mean, just like we're well, in terms of what we've actually transitioned, we're close to 20%. That's transition. But the pace, the rate of change rate of change of 24 was okay, it's reasonable. But if with
Yeah.
that rate of change of growth of renewables in 2024, we would be 100% renewable by a year 2120 or so. At
Yeah.
the rate of 20 in 2025 so far, it's gone down. The rate has gone down so far, partly due to Trump shutting off offshore wind and some
Yeah.
other slowdowns due to fears about what's going to happen, what has happened subsequently with subsidies. It'll be around 2140 or so before we
Mm.
get to 100% renewables. Now, in fact, India is even at a faster pace now than the
Mm.
US. In 2024, the US was at a faster pace than India. Now, India's at a faster pace, although US still has higher actual penetration right now.
And how much the rest of the world is actually dependent also in their transition on China, knowing that China is the biggest producer of, say, solar?
Probably a lot, but it's not to say, but each like the US actually has enough materials to transition a lot on its own. In
Mhm.
fact, it's a net exporter of a lot of things like rare earth elements. It's interesting that it only, there's if we use right now, we're not producing everything we're importing a lot, but like rare earths though, we're actually exporting like 6 times more than we're using. So we can actually not export and even but at the current rate that we're using, we have there's like 200 years of rare earths resources in
Yeah.
the US available. So it's not like you can't get it. And there's plenty of lithium in the United States. And the more we look for lithium, the more we find. Just in the last year, right now, there are about 19 million tons of lithium reserves in the U.S. In 2024, the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, estimated 14 million tons. So in 1 year, they went from 14 million to 19 million tons just because they looked for more. So it's not, there's plenty of
Yeah.
lithium out in the US, plenty of rare earths. There's other stuff as well, but we're not manufacturing the solar panels the same scale as China and a lot of other places. But
What can you walk me through this idea? No miracles needed. What are we overlooking that's already in front of us?
well, it's really we have a solution. The solution is simple. It's like electrify transportation with battery electric vehicles, some hydrogen fuel cell electric for long distance heavy transport only. Uh, Go to electrify buildings with electric heat pumps for air and water heating, air conditioning, electric induction
Mhm.
cooktops for cooking, LED lights, energy efficiency, buildings insulation, industry, electric arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces, dielectric heaters, electron beam heaters, electric heat pumps, fire bricks for storing
Mhm.
heat. Just electrify those sectors, provide the electricity with onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and power plants, concentrated solar power, some geothermal, electricity, geothermal heat, some solar heat, some hydroelectricity primarily. So that's what we got to do, stop combustion. But the problem we're having is everybody, well, the fossil fuel industry, they don't want to be irrelevant in this solution. So they've been proposing 4 technologies that are what I call greenwashing technologies that are completely useless to
Mhm.
distract people from the real solution. That's carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, electrofuels. The
Mhm.
bioenergy industry, agricultural industry, has their own set of useless technologies they've been pushing to stay relevant. That's biofuels, which are for liquid fuels for transportation, and biomass for electricity generation and to some extent biogas
Yeah.
and for different purposes. And then you have the nuclear industry wanting to stay relevant. So they've been pushing these vaporware technology, small modular reactors, which don't exist commercially, as well as trying to keep existing large reactors open and pushing for some large reactors. So they just want, so they all want subsidies, and they try, if they can get subsidies, doesn't matter if these technologies work or not. They can just keep building them. I mean, they all work in something. I mean, they'll like nuclear is going to eventually produce some electricity, but it takes 17, 18 years in the
Yeah.
US. In North America, it's in Europe, it's about 17 to 23 years. The rest of the world is 12 to 23 years. So eventually they'll produce electricity, but we only have 5 years to solve 80% of the problem and 10 to 15
Yeah.
years to solve 100%. So we can't rely on technologies that you can't even build in
Mm.
5 to
In
10
the
years.
Yeah. And what's the biggest bottleneck you see? Is it technical or political?
No, it's this distraction by these useless technologies, by carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, electrofuels, small, large nuclear reactors, biofuels, biomass. All these technologies, even under Biden in the US, 40% of the subsidies under the Inflation Reduction Act went to these useless technologies. And now it's going to be a much higher percent because solar and wind subsidies have just been cut out and electric vehicle subsidies have been cut out in the US. So more of the subsidies are just going to the useless technology. So that's the problem. We're getting distracted. And then you have people pushing them, claiming that they're helpful when they don't help one bit. They harm. Like carbon capture, direct air capture, they don't decrease CO2 in the air, they increase CO2. Because even in the best case, because there's a huge energy penalty. They're not like trees. I mean, when we talk about direct air capture, that's synthetic direct air capture, where you have equipment to draw out CO2 from the air. And then you need energy for that equipment, and you need to build
Mm.
pipelines, CO2 pipelines, to transport the CO2 somewhere. And that energy penalty is huge. I mean, incredibly huge. Just to give you an idea of how huge it is, like when you put CO2, all the CO2 in the world from human sources, it generated, for every ton of CO2 that was added to the air, it generated about 3,000 kilowatt hours of energy. To take 1 ton of CO2 out of the air, it takes 5,000 to 6,000 kilowatt hours of energy. So if you want to take all the CO2 that's been put in the air out of
Yeah.
the air, you'll need twice as much energy as you generated putting it in the air in the first place. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. So, but it's
So
but
they are actually getting the electricity from renewables, getting the subsidies, and still selling fossil fuels under everything that's
oh yeah,
happening. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, just to finish up on the carbon capture thing, direct air capture, even when they use renewable energy, then they'll say, okay, that doesn't emit more. Well, the thing is, you're preventing renewable energy when you're
Yeah.
using it
To
for
be
carbon
used.
capture from replacing a coal plant or gas plant. And you would reduce more CO2 just by replacing a coal or gas plant with renewable energy than using the renewable energy to run carbon capture or direct air capture. So you're always increasing CO2 by
Yeah.
with these technologies. You're not decreasing it. Plus, you're increasing air pollution because you're preventing that renewables from getting rid of the air pollution from the coal or gas. And you always have pipelines. You need more fossil fuel infrastructure because you're not shutting down any fossil plants. You're just taxing people because this is
Mm.
the carbon capture, direct air capture is just a tax. They're just an additional cost that who pays that? It's low income. I mean, people who pay the highest fraction of their income to electricity are low income people. So carbon capture and direct air capture are just a tax on low income people. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And just increases CO2. It's just the most vicious type of technology. It's just incredibly ridiculous. But they're all those technologies are. So we need to focus on what works if we actually care about solving the problem.
So there's been a lot of hype about green hydrogen. I would like to know your opinion on it. Although it's green, but it has drawbacks. What do you think?
Yeah. So, well, well, first of all, what is green hydrogen? It's hydrogen produced from water, where basically the simple version is you pass electricity through water and it splits
Yeah.
into oxygen and hydrogen. But it's a little more complicated than that, but that's basically the idea. So if you use renewable electricity for hydrogen production through electrolysis, then that's green hydrogen, as opposed to, let's say, gray hydrogen is hydrogen from gas. Blue hydrogen is hydrogen from gas with carbon capture added. Then there's all sorts of other colors of hydrogen, but the gray hydrogen is like 96% of all hydrogen produced in the world. So well, first of all, any hydrogen that you do produce, we only want to produce from renewable. So we only want green hydrogen. So right now, 96% of hydrogen is gray hydrogen, which is bad. So at a minimum, we want to replace that bad with green hydrogen. So like for ammonia production, which you would need a hydrogen for ammonia production. Ammonia is NH3, nitrogen and three
Yeah.
hydrogen atoms, but the process of producing it, you combine nitrogen from the air with hydrogen. So you need that hydrogen right now, it comes from gas. So it's better to use green hydrogen than gray hydrogen for ammonia production. Steel production, there's a way to, right now, there's CO2 emissions from steel just from the off gassing of CO2 from coal or coke. Because
Mhm.
when you're producing steel, you take iron ore, which is
Yeah.
Fe2O3, and you add coke or coal and burn it. And that the carbon from that takes off the oxygen from the iron ore to purify the iron. So then you have the CO2 that then gets released as a gas. But you can do the same thing with hydrogen at a lower temperature. You can get rid of the
Mm.
oxygen from the iron ore and purify iron so you have no CO2. So that's another
Yeah.
good application of green hydrogen is steel production. So ammonia production, steel production. A third good application is long distance transport, right? If you want
Yeah.
to, for transportation, you want to use battery electric vehicles as much as possible because they're more efficient than for passenger vehicles. They're way more efficient than hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. I mean,
Yeah.
you can make
Yeah.
a green hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle that's clean. The only emissions are water vapor, but you're going to need 3 times the number of wind turbines as a battery electric vehicle. So why would you do that? You don't want it. That's not efficient. So, but the tables do turn for long distance heavy transport, specifically long distance aircraft, long distance ships, where hydrogen actually becomes more efficient because you have to have big storage and it's a lot easier to store hydrogen. It's very light fuel than it is to add more and more batteries for like a long distance 747, for example. So that's a third application is just very niche, long distance heavy transport, long distance aircraft, ships, maybe some long distance trucks, but even their batteries can win. And then the final application is some grid electricity storage. Again, batteries are better, but sometimes a mix of batteries and hydrogen used in fuel cells for grid electricity storage, especially for uh, off grid, like if you're in a
Yeah.
remote microgrids away from it, say in the Arctic, having hydrogen there and producing the hydrogen from wind, you can actually store the hydrogen for a long time and you can generate not only electricity but heat directly. So it's a good application. But what's not good is using hydrogen to heat homes, not for passenger vehicles, not to burn it for industry. We don't need that at all. So just these four applications I mentioned, uh,
Mhm.
and so limited applications and only green hydrogen.
So, do you think that we are not deploying fast enough? Are we focused on innovation too much?
Well, when we say we, like in the US, yeah, not fast enough. As I mentioned, China is really deploying way faster than I thought they could or would. Um, whether they sustain that over time will still to be seen, but at the pace they're going, they will be 100% renewable across all energy sectors by 2042, 43, well, 42, I think it is. And that requires that they electrify all energy as well. So they have to go to all electric vehicles, go to heat pumps for buildings, electric induction cooktops. So get rid of fossil fuels and all combustion, bioenergy fuels for all combustion sources. So they electrify everything and they provide the electricity with just wind, water, solar. They're at that pace. They're building enough wind and solar and some hydro as well to get there by 2042, 43. Uh, and so that's really good news. But the US is right now at the pace it will be after 2100 to get there.
Yeah.
The US could ramp it up, but the problem is we're being distracted. Too much money is going to useless technologies like carbon capture, direct air capture, blue
Yeah.
hydrogen, etc.
Yeah. the oil and gas heritage. What do you make of scientists who say we agree on goal but not on a timeline?
Um, well, if they're saying we don't agree on the timeline in terms of they don't think it's as urgent,
Yeah,
that's a problem. If they're saying we don't agree on the timeline because we just can't get there politically, well, yeah, probably because people like that are not stressing the urgency and focusing on the ball. There's this whole camp of people called the pushing policies called all of the above policy. And it really started under the Obama administration as all of the above. Let's just try everything and hope something works. And that's a failed policy. So
mm,
both parties are guilty of this, all of the above policy failure. We really need to focus on what works, and we know what works. We know what the problem is. And it's also like sometimes people will focus only on climate. If they ignore energy security and air pollution, but just focus on climate, you might get a different set of tools. So, like if you don't care about air pollution, health problems, or energy security, then you're going to allow biomass. Let's say an air pollution case, you're going to allow biofuels, biomass. You're going to allow carbon capture, uh, even though that doesn't really help with climate either. But it's
yeah,
they don't even care about the fact that you keep burning the coal. In fact, you need 25% more coal because you need 25% more energy to run the carbon capture equipment for carbon capture for a coal plant. That means 25% more coal burning, so more air pollution. So if you don't care about air
mm,
pollution, sure, you propose all these other technologies. If you don't care about energy security, you propose nuclear, or
yeah.
even air pollution because it takes so long. If you want to ignore how long it takes to build a nuclear plant and plan it, then you choose nuclear. Yeah, you can rationalize any kind of technology, but if you need to focus on all the problems simultaneously. So it's air pollution, energy security, and climate,
Yeah.
and there are other problems as well. Then your technologies that can solve these problems simultaneously narrows considerably.
You modeled all of these plans and potential solutions. Are we going to get there on time? That's my final question for today.
Um,
Your opinion.
well, I think if there are other countries, so I said China is really rapidly transitioning. There are actually about 10 or 11 countries, pretty much all in Europe. They're actually faster than China in their pace that they're transitioning. And and so that's good news. So yeah, some countries will get there because they've got everything set up. They have a mindset. They're not distracted by uh, fossil fuels and bioenergy fuels, although every country has a little bit of distraction. So there are some countries, and hopefully they will shame all the other countries that are lagging into this. And and the countries that are lagging will see the economic benefit that accrues to those who transition fast. It's not only the fact that you have cleaner air because you have less air pollution and you have your greenhouse gas emissions, but you create more jobs. Turns out you use less land. Give you an example. In the US, 1.3% of all US land is occupied by the fossil fuel industry. Another
Yeah.
1.25%, 2425% is occupied by the agricultural industry for just growing corn for ethanol, which supplies only 4% of US transportation fuels. So if you add the ethanol land plus the fossil fuel land, that's 2.54% of US land. Whereas converting the US to 100% renewables without any need for bioenergy fuels or fossil fuels, you only use about 1% of land. So you decrease the land requirements substantially by going to wind, water, solar. So there's a land benefit, and then there's a cost benefit too. By
Mm,
electrifying and providing the electricity with clean renewable energy, first of all, by electrifying, you reduce your energy demand because electricity is more efficient than combustion.
yeah.
And plus, worldwide, about 11 to 12% of all energy worldwide is used to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium for continuous use for energy, which we don't need that fuel anymore. So that saves about 12% there. Electric heat pumps and electric vehicles and electric industry reduce demand further. Energy efficiency improvements beyond business as usual reduce it. So we can reduce demand by about 54% by electrifying, providing the electricity with wind, water, solar. We get an additional cost per unit energy savings of 15%. So we reduce the annual energy cost by 60% by going the wind, water, solar route. And that results in an energy payback time of your investment to transition of about 6 years worldwide. And
Yeah.
most countries are around there too. But there's also the health and climate cost savings. So there's a 90% social cost reduction. So the
Yeah.
social cost payback time is 1 year, less than 1 year. So there's a cost benefit, there's a health benefit, there's a land benefit, a jobs benefit. Why wouldn't we do this? There's no benefit of doing it.
There's no benefit for the corporations.
Yeah, so it's people who have the vested interest in the current infrastructure,
Yeah,
they're the ones who will lose, but they can join, their position to actually
yeah,
contribute to the solution.
for sure. Mark, thank you so much for being my guest today. I hope we
Yeah.
will talk again.
Thank you very much for having me on.